Humanity has stood on the edge of total annihilation more times than most people will ever understand. From a global nuclear standoff that could have erased civilization in minutes, to a concrete wall that trapped millions behind ideology, to a single exhausted naval officer who refused to press a button and may have saved the world. This was the Cold War, a 45-year confrontation that repeatedly brought human survival into question. The story begins in 1945, at the end of World War II. When Nazi Germany surrendered, celebrations erupted across London, New York, and Moscow. Crowds filled the streets, convinced that history had turned a corner and that peace had finally arrived. Yet beneath the celebrations, a new conflict was already taking shape. The alliance that defeated Hitler had never been built on trust or shared values. It existed solely because all sides faced a common enemy. Once that enemy vanished, so did the unity. On one side stood the United States, economically dominant, politically confident, and in possession of the most devastating weapon ever created, the atomic bomb. On the other stood the Soviet Union, physically devastated, deeply suspicious, and determined never again to allow foreign armies to ravage its territory. The Soviet perspective was shaped by unimaginable loss. Roughly 27 million Soviet citizens had died during the war, a trauma that permanently altered how its leaders viewed security and survival. The deeper problem, however, was ideological. The United States promoted capitalism, private enterprise, individual rights, and democratic governance. The Soviet Union championed communism, centralized economic control, collective ownership, and a one-party political system that suppressed dissent. Each side viewed the other not simply as a rival, but as a mortal threat to its way of life. When two superpowers both believe their survival is at stake, escalation becomes almost inevitable. Leadership on both sides intensified the tension. Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union through fear and force. He purged his military leadership, sent millions to labor camps, and trusted almost no one. Stalin believed the Western powers were intent on destroying the Soviet state, and he was prepared to secure Eastern Europe through coercion and violence if that ensured Soviet safety. Puppet governments, secret police, and military occupation became tools of survival in his worldview. Across the Atlantic, Harry Truman unexpectedly became president after Franklin Roosevelt's death. Barely weeks into office, Truman was informed that the United States had developed a weapon capable of unprecedented destruction. He inherited not only the atomic bomb, but also the responsibility of managing relations with Stalin. Truman was direct, decisive, and openly distrustful of Soviet intentions. He understood that post-war cooperation was fragile at best. Complicating matters further, Stalin already knew about America's nuclear capabilities. Soviet intelligence had infiltrated the Manhattan Project, allowing Stalin to accelerate his own nuclear program. The illusion of American nuclear monopoly was short-lived, and the foundation of the Cold War arms race was already laid. As tensions mounted, Winston Churchill gave the conflict its defining metaphor. Speaking in Missouri, he warned that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, dividing the continent into opposing political and military camps. The phrase captured the reality perfectly. Eastern Europe, devastated by war and power vacuums, fell rapidly under Soviet influence. Communist governments were installed across Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and East Germany, often under the watchful presence of the Red Army. Elections were manipulated, opposition was silenced, and resistance was met with imprisonment or death. The United States responded with a policy known as containment. Washington accepted that communism already controlled parts of Europe, but it would resist any further expansion. Germany became the central battleground of this strategy. After the war, the country was divided among the Allied powers, but Berlin, located deep within the Soviet zone, was also split. West Berlin emerged as a democratic enclave surrounded by communist territory, a situation Stalin found intolerable. In 1948, Soviet forces cut off all land access to West Berlin, aiming to force the Western powers to abandon the city or provoke a military confrontation. Instead, the United States and its allies launched the Berlin Airlift, flying food, fuel, and medicine into the city around the clock. The operation was a logistical triumph and a powerful, symbolic victory. After nearly a year, Stalin lifted the blockade, marking the West's first major success in the Cold War without firing a single shot. That balance shifted abruptly when the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. Nuclear parity transformed global politics overnight. Both sides raced to build larger, more destructive arsenals, eventually developing hydrogen bombs far more powerful than those used in Japan. By the 1960s, the superpowers possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet multiple times over. This led to the doctrine of mutual assured destruction. The logic was grim but effective. If one side launched a nuclear attack, the other would retaliate, guaranteeing total devastation for both. The certainty of mutual annihilation discouraged either side from pressing the button, creating a fragile and terrifying form of stability. The Cold War soon expanded beyond Europe. In 1949, communists under Mao Zedong won China's civil war, bringing the world's most populous nation into the communist bloc. American leaders feared a chain reaction, known as the domino theory, where one country falling to communism would trigger regional collapse. That fear seemed validated in 1950 when North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union, invaded South Korea. The United States intervened under United Nations authority, leading to 3 years of brutal fighting. Initial successes gave way to disaster when China entered the war, forcing American forces into a massive retreat. General Douglas MacArthur advocated using nuclear weapons, but Truman refused and ultimately removed him from command. The war ended in a stalemate, leaving Korea divided and demonstrating that Cold War rivalry could erupt into full-scale conventional war without crossing the nuclear threshold. Stalin's death in 1953 brought new uncertainty. His successor, Nikita Khrushchev, denounced Stalin's crimes and spoke of peaceful coexistence, but he remained committed to communist dominance. When Hungary attempted to break free from Soviet control, Khrushchev sent tanks, crushing the uprising and reinforcing Soviet authority through violence. Technological competition soon reached space. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 shocked the United States, signaling that Soviet rockets could reach American cities. The space race was, in reality, a missile race. Early Soviet successes intensified American fears and spurred massive investment in science and technology. President John F. Kennedy responded by setting an ambitious national goal, landing a man on the moon before the decade's end. Yet even as America looked skyward, Europe faced renewed division. In 1961, East Germany erected the Berlin Wall, sealing off the West and trapping millions behind concrete, barbed wire, and armed guards. The wall symbolized the failure of communism to retain